The Dispossessed, An Ambiguous Utopia is a 1974 utopian science fiction novel by Ursula K. Le Guin, set in the same fictional universe as that of The Left Hand of Darkness. The book won the Nebula Award for Best Novel in 1974, won both the Hugo and Locus Awards in 1975, and received a nomination for the John W. Campbell Memorial Award in 1975. It achieved a degree of literary recognition unusual for science fiction works due to its exploration of many ideas and themes, including anarchism and revolutionary societies, capitalism, individualism and collectivism, and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It features the development of the mathematical theory underlying the fictional ansible, an instantaneous communications device that plays a critical role in Le Guin's Hainish Cycle. The invention of the ansible places the novel first in the internal chronology of the Hainish Cycle, although it was the fifth Hainish novel published. Setting: the story of The Dispossessed is set on Anars and Eurus, the twin inhabited worlds of Tau Ceti. Sessions are mentioned in other Ecumen novels and short stories. An anaresti appears in the short story The Shobi Story. Eurus before the settlement of Anars is the setting for the short story The Day Before the Revolution. In The Dispossessed, Eurus is divided into several states which are dominated by the two largest ones, which are rivals. In a clear allusion to the United States and the Soviet Union, one has a capitalist economy and patriarchal system and the other is an authoritarian system that claims to rule in the name of the proletariat. Further developing the analogy, there are oppositional left-wing parties in AIO, one of which is closely linked to the rival society THU, as were communist parties in the US and other Western countries at the time the story was written. Other parties represent various dissident visions of socialism. Where the situation differs from that of 20th century Earth is the existence of the anarcho-syndicalist world Anars, representing a third ideological alternative. However, its influence is weakened by most Adonians having agreed generations ago to into exile on a different world and cut themselves off. There are still some Adonians in AIO, who eventually contact Shevk with a note chiding him for betraying his beliefs by working at the university and accepting the government's hospitality. Beyond that, there is a third major, though underdeveloped, area called Benbilai Euro. When a revolution supported by the breaks out there, AIO invades, generating a proxy war. Thus, Benbilai comes to represent Southeast Asia, an allusion to the Vietnam War. Although there are a wide variety of parties in AIO, there are no opposition parties on Anars, only an Adonian orthodoxy that rules without any overt enforcement or oppression, although free thinkers who go too far can end up in psychiatric institutions, as happens with Shevk's childhood friend, Tyrin. In the last chapter of The Dispossessed, we learn that the Hainish people arrived at Tau Ceti 60 years ago, which is more than 150 years after the secession of the Odonians from Eurus and their exodus to Anars. Terrans are also there, and the novel occurs sometime in the future. A date of 2300 has been suggested, while the complexities of Ursti history hint otherwise. The plot structure equals, the chapters alternate between the worlds. Even-numbered chapters are set on Anars, odd-numbered chapters are set on Eurus. The only exceptions are the first and the last chapter, which include both worlds and are, thematically, chapters of transition. In Chapter 1, we are basically in the middle of the story, while the plot of the last Anars chapter ends at a point before the plot of the first chapter begins. Themes equals, the story takes place on the fictional planet Eurus and its habitable twin Anars. In order to forestall an anarcho-syndicalist rebellion, the major Ursti states gave the revolutionaries the right to live on Anars, along with a guarantee of non-interference, approximately 200 years before the events of The Dispossessed. Before this, Anars had had no permanent settlements apart from some mining. The economic and political situation of Anars and its relation to Eurus is ambiguous. The people of Anars consider themselves as being free and independent, having broken off from the political and social influence of the Old World. But the powers of Eurus consider Anars as being essentially their mining colony, the annual consignment of precious metals mined on Anars and its division among the major powers of Eurus being a major economic event of the Old World. The ambiguity of Arnell's situation is symbolically manifested in the low fence surrounding Arnell's single spaceport, the only place on the anarchist planet where no trespassing signs may be seen, where the book begins and ends. Does the fence divide a free world from the corrupting influence of an oppressor's ships, as the people of Arnaz think? Or is it in fact a prison fence, keeping the rest of the planet imprisoned and cut off? This question is posed by the writer at the very outset, with Shevk's life essentially an effort to answer it. The protagonist Shevk is a physicist attempting to develop a general temporal theory. A physics of the book describes time as having a much deeper, more complex structure than we understand it. It incorporates not only mathematics and physics, but also philosophy and ethics. The meaning of the theories in the book weaves into the plot, not only describing abstract physical concepts, but the ups and downs of the characters' lives, and the transformation of the anarchistic society. An oft-quoted saying in the book is "true journey is return." The meaning of Shevk's theories which deal with the nature of time and simultaneity have been subject to interpretation. For example, there have been interpretations that the non-linear nature of the novel is a reproduction of Shevk's theory. Arnaz is in theory a society without government or coercive authoritarian institutions, and the people of Arnaz are explicitly anarchist. Yet in pursuing research that deviates from his society's current consensus understanding, Shevk begins to come up against very real obstacles. Shevk gradually develops an understanding that the revolution which brought his world into being is stagnating, and power structures are beginning to exist where there were none before. He therefore embarks on the risky and highly controversial journey to the home planet, Eurus, seeking to open communications between the worlds and to finish his general temporal theory with the help of academics on Eurus. The novel details his struggles on both Eurus and his home world of Arnaz. Shevk experiences hatred from some of the people on Arnaz due to his journey to Eurus to advance his research, and due to his idea about increasing contact with the home planet. So the story touches on the themes of how people suffer for pursuing their purpose in life, and how they suffer for speaking out for change. The book also explores the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that language shapes thinking, and thus, culture. The language spoken on the anarchist planet Arnaz, Pravik, is a constructed language that reflects many aspects of the philosophical foundations of utopian anarchism. For instance, the use of the possessive case is strongly discouraged. Children are trained to speak only about matters that interest others. Anything else is egoizing. There is no property ownership of any kind. Shevk's daughter, upon meeting him for the first time, tells him, "You can share the handkerchief I use, rather than you may borrow my handkerchief," thus conveying the idea that the handkerchief is not owned by the girl, merely used by her. The Dispossessed looks into the mechanisms that may be developed by an anarchist society, but also the dangers of centralization and bureaucracy that might easily take over such society without the continuation of revolutionary ideology. Part of its power is that it establishes a spectrum of well-developed characters, who illustrate many types of personalities, all educated in an environment that measures people not by what they own, but by what they can do, and how they relate to other human beings. Possibly the best example of this is the character of Tykva, the hero's partner, who exemplifies many virtues: loyalty, love of life and living things, perseverance, and desire for a true partnership with another person. However, in order to ensure the survival of their society in a harsh environment, the people of Arnaz are taught from childhood to put the needs of their society ahead of their own personal desires. Shevk and Tykva, as good Adonians, take work postings away from each other, and Shevk does hard agricultural labor in a dusty desert instead of working on his research, because he is needed there due to a famine. The work is sometimes said to represent one of the few modern revivals of the utopian genre, and there are many characteristics of a utopian novel found in this book. Most obviously, Shevk is an outsider when he arrives on Eurus, following the traveler convention common in utopian literature. All of the characters portrayed in the novel have a certain spirituality or intelligence. There are no nondescript characters. It is also true that there are aspects of Arnaz that are utopian. It is presented as a pure society that adheres to its own theories and ideals, which are starkly juxtaposed with Euro's society. When first published, the book included the tagline, "The Magnificent Epic of an Ambiguous Utopia," which was shortened by fans to An Ambiguous Utopia, and adopted as a subtitle in certain editions. The major theme of the work is the ambiguity between different notions of utopia. And ours is not presented as a perfect society, even within the constraints of what might define an anarchist utopia. Bureaucracy, stagnation, and power structures have problematized the revolution, as Shevk comes to realize throughout the course of the novel. Moreover, Le Guin has painted a very stark picture of the natural and environmental constraints on society. And ours citizens are forced to contend with a relatively sparse and unfruitful world. Le Guin's title could be in reference to Dostoevsky's novel The Possessed, but hardship caused by lack of resources is also a prominent theme. The people of Anars are dispossessed in the sense that they have no personal material possessions, since all goods are held in common. In contrast, the working-class majority of Euros are dispossessed in the sense that they do not have access to the wealth which has been created with their labor. Much of the philosophical underpinnings and ecological concepts came from Murray Bookchin's post-scarcity anarchism, according to a letter Le Guin sent to Bookchin. Anars citizens are dispossessed not just by political choice, but by the very lack of actual resources to possess. Here, again, Le Guin draws a contrast with the natural wealth of Euros, and the competitive behaviors this fosters. Le Guin's foreword to the novel notes that our anarchism is closely akin to that of Peter Kropotkin's, whose mutual aid closely assessed the influence of the natural world on competition and cooperation. Le Guin's use of realism in this aspect of the work further complicates a simple utopian interpretation of the work. Anars is not a perfect society, and Le Guin's The Dispossessed seems to argue that no such thing is possible. Reception: the novel received generally positive reviews. Baird Sells characterized the novel as an extraordinary work, saying Le Guin had created a working society in exquisite detail, and a fully realized hypothetical culture, as well as living breathing characters who are inevitable products of that culture. Gerald Jonas, writing in the New York Times, said that Le Guin's book, written in her solid, no-nonsense prose, is so persuasive that it ought to put a stop to the writing of prescriptive utopias for at least 10 years. Theodore Sturgeon praised The Dispossessed as a beautifully written, beautifully composed book, saying it performs one of SF's prime functions, which is to create another kind of social system to see how it would work. Or if it would work. Lester Del Rey, however, gave the novel a mixed review, citing the quality of Le Guin's writing but claiming that the ending slips badly, a deus ex machina that destroys much of the strength of the novel. Translations: Bulgarian, THNTH squared TH3/4 TH plus or minus TH3/4 TH micron TH1/2 THNN, Chinese, a Euroi, permil Euro permil, 2009, Chinese, a Euro C permil Euro permil, 2005, Croatian, Judy Bez Iga, 2009, Czech, Vide Darnik, 1995, Dutch, Dion Themed, Finnish, Osatomian Planeta, 1979, French, Les Dar Copyright Posse Copyright Dar Copyright S, 1975, German, Planet der Habe Nights, 1976 Later Die Ententon, 2006, Greek, II. Plus or minus I1/2 I plus or minus II to the first II permil I1/2 II florin I1/4 I permil I1/2, Hebrew, Koea Euro, 1980 Later Unregistered trademark Unregistered trademark Unregistered trademark K Unregistered trademark Gigahertz 2015, Hungarian, Akisima Zedk, 1994, Italian, Irietti dello Altro Pianeta, Later Quelli di Anars, 1976, Japanese, permil Euro permil AAAA Euro, 1986, Korean, E to the first 1/4 I, EI. E-currency, 2002, Polish, Idzikini, Portuguese, Os Despojados, Os Despejados, Romanian, Deposta pound E, 1995, Russian, THTH plus or minus TH micron THTH 3 quarters THTH micron TH 1 half TH 1 half and TH micron, 1994, THTH plus or minus THTH micron THN TH 1 half TH 1 half and TH micron, 1997, Serbian, Arovek Pratso Angstrom also known as, 1987, Spanish, Los Desposidos, 1983, Swedish, Shevk, 1976, Turkish, Ma 1 quarter LKSA 1 quarters Lair. Other versions, in 1987, the CBC radio anthology program Vanishing Point adapted The Dispossessed into a series of 6 30-minute episodes. See also Hainish Cycle novels, Rakanan's World, 1966, Planet of Exile, 1966, City of Illusions, 1967, The Left Hand of Darkness, 1969, The Word for World is Forest, 1976, Four Ways to Forgiveness, 1995, The Telling, 2000, Other Works, Ursula K. Le Guin Bibliography, Themes, Anarchism in the Arts, Libertarian Socialism. References, Notes. Bibliography. External links, full text of The Dispossessed at libcon.org, The Dispossessed title listing of the Internet Speculative Fiction Database, audio review and discussion of The Dispossessed at the Science Fiction Book Review Podcast, Guin Wiki, Anars specifically, note the link to a readable map of Anars, Guin Wiki, Euros specifically, note the link to a readable map of Euros, The Dispossessed at Worlds Without End, CBC Radio Vanishing Point audio production of The Dispossessed at the Internet Archive, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5, Part 6.